main messages of the volume Migration Challenges, Differing Answers. There's hardly a topic in international law that is more controversial today than the question of migration. People displacing themselves, changing their place of residence is an issue that has existed throughout human history. But as today humankind lives in well-established societies with distinct street borders, human displacement has become a question of sovereignty. For as long as states have existed, these sovereign entities have claimed the right to determine who lives on their territory. Since population is one of the three constituting elements of a state, the change of population may seriously affect the state itself. However, a certain fluctuation in population is natural and acceptable. International law itself accepts people other than nationals or citizens, such as migrant workers, refugees, or stateless persons as belonging to the population of a given state. To which category someone belongs to is not only important from the individual's point of view, but also for the state. Never before has it been so important to use the terminology so exactly as it is now. Message number 1. The appropriate use of terminology may be the key to finding appropriate solutions to the challenges, as confusing terms refugee, asylum seeker, and migrant may lead to the mismanagement of situations. It is necessary to develop precise mechanisms to control migration and refugee processes so that they are under strict control and conducted in a predictable and safe manner. States have legal solutions corresponding to the country's specificities, traditions, and needs, and the international framework shall build on the essential cooperation principle and shall guide the states by providing a universally or regionally feasible framework. In the European Union, it's essential to properly ascribe the rights of migrants and refugees, as due to the idea of European citizenship as well as the technical facilitations of the Schengen area, an internal freedom that exists for almost all the citizens of the relevant member states in a way that is practically unknown anywhere in the world. Under such circumstances, it's more than relevant for the member states to be able to distinguish between lawful and unlawful residents. Message number 2. Coming to the international responses, we have to know that there is a fragile balance between the competence of states to control the access of aliens to their territory and the protection of the most vulnerable people fleeing from gross human rights violations. While the existing international framework has a historic role, it certainly doesn't answer to the modern challenges. The states were always only willing to accept a certain amount of refugees and not assume unlimited and indefinite commitment in terms of all refugees for the future, and the international community did not intend to offer a haven for all suffering individuals. Although national defense does not fall within the scope of the Council of Europe's framework, migration issues do arise within the framework of defending human rights, predominantly in cases in front of the European Court of Human Rights. Our message number 3. There is a fine balance between human rights considerations and national interests, and human rights shall not be used as a barrier to member states in the field of migration, while at the same time providing all necessary guarantees to the people in question. Wanting to enter somewhere we are not entitled to cannot per se be considered a human right, and it is the local authorities' responsibility to differentiate between funded and unfounded claims. Authorities who bear responsibility for their decisions shall be allowed to inform themselves in any way necessary, for instance, by country reports including the principle of safe third countries, and to take into account national security interests or the fight against terrorism. But arbitrariness should, of course, be avoided. When it comes to detention, reasonable timeframes and appropriate conditions are among the requirements set for the states. Message number 4. The system, whether from a human rights or a border control perspective, was not prepared to face such a massive scale of migration as we are facing in the last decade in Europe. Reforms, including that of the Dublin system, should be adopted that take into consideration all the relevant interests of the states, also the modern challenges. Message number 5. The European borders should be protected, among others in the interest of the Schengen area and the freedoms of European citizens. This aspect should be a priority. It is now high time, in order for Schengen to survive, that member states reaffirm their mutual trust. While the Schengen border controls were introduced only 40 times between 2006 and 2015, This happened 280 times between 2015 and 2022. The numbers speak for themselves. Message number 6. It is worth taking a deeper look into the demographic aspects of migration. While it surely cannot resolve Europe's main demographic challenges, such as population or the workforce shortages, as immigration can gloss over the real problems, but it's insufficient to generate a lasting and sustainable population growth. On the one hand, it is worth noting that the economic force of Europe is shrinking parallel to its population. While in 1900, Europe, excluding Russia, had nearly 20% of the world's population and accounted for roughly 40% of the global economic product. 100 years later, it had less than 9% of all people and produced less than 25% of the global output. By 2050, it expected that its population share will slip to about 6% of the global total, and its share of global economic product may be as low as 10%. On the other hand, unlike a controlled number, a large influx of migrants does not drive migrants to adopt the ideas, values, and practices of the accepting country. The question or primary concern remains therefore how the eventual positive effects of migration can be harnessed in European countries without those countries losing their cultural and religious identity. Maybe that is why immigration is regarded as an important issue in the EU. In fact, approximately 4 out of 10 EU citizens see immigration as the most important issue. The targeted Eurobarometer surveys show that citizens are only partly content with the integration processes or with the results of their national government's actions in this regard. Only a fifth of EU citizens regard immigration as an opportunity, whereas 38% see it more as a problem and 31% equally as a problem and an opportunity. Returning irregular migrants is also a topic that needs a better legal and practical solution than exists today. In this regard, it is worth assessing the decisions of various constitutional courts of the Central European region. All in all, more than a decade has passed since the Arab Spring and the subsequent influx of people fleeing the region for Europe, as well as an unprecedented influx of immigrants from various other parts of the world. It soon turned out that the existing EU rules, adopted for obvious humanitarian reasons but in quite different circumstances, created tensions between those states first receiving the arrivals and the other EU member states. It also turned out that there are limits to solidarity and huge differences in attitudes towards migration, differences that have given rise to serious political disputes. In the meantime, more than 2 years ago now, war broke out in the direct neighborhood of the European Union, with neighboring countries still receiving tens of thousands of refugees every day. But apart from the tragedy and the horror of this war, something else also came to light. These countries, almost exactly those the loudest in resisting uncontrolled entry of migrants and thus accused of being inhuman, behaved more humanly than many others before when faced with a situation of an actual war. With no safe third country in sight, they are hosting or caring for millions of refugees, for instance, people fleeing directly from an actual war, a fact that is very clear from a legal point of view, although less known about the region of Central Europe. This volume highlights the importance of not confusing concepts. Migrants are not refugees. Instruments created for a certain number of asylum applications are not necessarily, well, in fact, simply not suitable to deal with a 10-fold, 100-fold, or 1,000-fold increase in numbers. At the same time, the countries of the Central European region, as well as the international community as a whole, take the individual aspects of this phenomenon very seriously, taking a stance in helping at the source, in the country of origin, as well as respecting the human rights requirements. The challenge lies in approaching the issue from further, realizing that it is probably one of the biggest challenges, even legal challenges, the European Union has ever faced, because it has brought to the surface disruptions which were not evident beforehand, created mistrust within the community, put third country interests and the influence of EU countries in a different perspective, and because it questions achievements like Schengen, one of the most precious values of European integration for the countries and the peoples of Eastern Central Europe, previously for decades under Soviet oppression. The first step in solving the dispute is to understand it. It was also the mission of this volume to contribute to a better understanding of the region representing the different aspects of the issue of migration from an Eastern Central European perspective. Thank you very much for your attention.